Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great theme, this conference. How do we take back control of this phrase, take control? More to the point, how do we take our country back? Remember the one we used to live in that was more open-minded and more welcoming? These are things that I think need to occupy us right now. And actually more urgently, how do we take control of the Brexit, post-Brexit context? Because I think it's veering very dangerously in the wrong direction. I'll come on to speak about that. But I don't know if you, but I have wondered at moments since the referendum just how the rest of Europe sees us right now, and indeed the rest of the world. You know, we look like we are wrapped up in our own selfish world. Surely the lowest point came this weekend when, after a fight in the European Parliament, one MP walked out of a hospital where another one was receiving free healthcare at the expense of the French people to complain about the croissants. I thought that was probably the lowest moment, I think, in recent political history. But that's where we are right now. And I think, as you were just discussing, we have to kind of work out, as a progressive left, where we go from here and how we get up and start influencing the debate that we're in. And actually, that's why I suppose I'm closing today, because I'm not just I'm going to bring you some analysis, but I'm also going to bring you a big solution to help us all take control. And in my view, that is devolution in England. And that's what I think is part of a major part of the answer to the discussions that you've been having today. Let me just talk about the referendum and the result for a moment. It was about immigration. Yes, it was, partly. It was about the European Union, partly. But I think history will come to show that it was much more than that. It was, in fact, in my view, a huge cry for change in the way this country is run from some of its more neglected areas. That, in the end, I think, is what was beneath that referendum result. Looking back, for me, I think the surprise is that so many people were taken by surprise by the result, because, if we're honest, this sentiment had been building and building over a very long period of time. You know, I was hearing in my constituency from the moment the referendum result date was announced that the establishment was in for a very big shock. That's what people were saying. And I predicted it before. I'm not saying that to be clever, just that I kind of felt from the people I was speaking to in the Northwest that there was going to be quite a big leave vote in certain parts of the country. But what I noticed was, when I was ever in more professional gatherings, I went to a gathering of my old Cambridge College, who all, when I said to them, I think it's going to be Brexit, went, no, surely not, it's going to be Remain by maybe small majority. But there seemed to be a clear view amongst people that it would be Remain. And I think that, it brought over to me how we live in two countries now. There was two very different perspectives on that referendum, and they didn't see each other before that result was announced. And that, I think, caused a quite profound sense of shock when the result was announced. Many of the places that voted leave, I think you need to look at the characteristics that they share. And I would say, not all, but many of them share something along the lines of the following. Former industrial areas that saw the industry go 30-ish years ago, but never saw anything, like Johnny Reynolds was saying, anything meaningful come in its place. The quality jobs were replaced by lower skill jobs in warehousing, in services. These are places that saw house prices collapse in the early 1990s and whole streets bought up by absent landlords who never visit, who have no commitment to those communities, and that still is the case today. These are places that saw another wave of profound social change when the European Union expanded in the middle part of the last decade. But again, I don't think there was any recognition from central government of the challenges that they were facing. And that has been the story that's been repeated in these areas. They experienced profound change without any real sense of help from the centre. And I have to say, what really annoys me is this kind of idea. Some people who voted leave, of course, may have done so for reasons to do with prejudice, but the vast majority of people in my constituency, they didn't vote leave out of a sense of narrow-mindedness, xenophobia, or even racism. Because you've got to remember, many of the places that did vote leave are the places that take practically all of the country's refugees and asylum seekers, as well as the majority of new arrivals from the EU. And they do so, for the most part, extremely successfully. And I think it's really important that we don't develop a narrative here that people in these areas are somehow voicing discrimination. They are not. What they are saying is, we do not feel that the country has been run fairly. We do not feel that Westminster has created a fair country. We feel that we live in two countries. That is what they are saying, if you really want to listen to them. So I say the answer to the referendum result doesn't lie there so much as here in the heart of our political system, and specifically in Westminster. For 30 years or more, governments of all colours, red, blue, and then the coalition, they have pursued policies, in my view, which are not designed for much of Britain, and certainly not designed for the areas I was just describing. They produce solutions that are dominated by the London perspective on life. And I want to give you some very specific examples of that. For instance, regeneration policy has been almost exclusively focused on city centres and not on smaller towns or suburbs. Industrial policy has been too focused on services, not on manufacturing. Education policy has been too focused on the academic route and not on technical education. Transport policy has been too focused on roads and cars rather than decent, affordable public transport. Housing policy has been too focused on owner occupation, not on affordable homes to rent. My point being that 30 years of that approach to national policy has failed to give these communities the answers that they are looking for, and consequently, they rightly, in my view, feel neglected. And it explains why Westminster's left them feeling very alienated. However, and I'll come on to this point about how we respond to Brexit, arguably, the government could be about to compound these problems rather than solve them. I think they are making three major errors in the way that they are responding to Brexit. Firstly, the first error, and possibly the biggest, is that they are working, or seeming to be working, on an assumption that the country voted for a hard Brexit, when in fact there is no evidence at all to suggest that that is the case. Secondly, that the government are pursuing a highly centralised and secretive approach to the Brexit negotiations, which I believe is the worst of the Westminster way, not even involving Parliament, but certainly not involving the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly, and Northern Ireland and other forms of devolved government. The third problem is, since the referendum, I think they have made policy choices that will only widen the divisions in our society, most obviously on education and selective education, but in other areas too. That again, in my view, are an entirely wrong response to the referendum, and actually they're pursuing these things without a mandate to do it from the public. It wasn't in the manifesto, which again will fuel that resentment against Westminster. So that's why I'm saying I think their government are making three major errors in their response, and I will say this in the debate on Brexit in the House of Commons tomorrow. On that point about hard Brexit, of the people who voted to leave, I think there is plentiful evidence that many people were very torn right up until polling day and were kind of weighing things in the balance. And I don't think you could possibly say that they were attracted to a harder form of Brexit. I think they were very torn. So, you know, the government, I don't think, can claim that anyone who voted leave is voting for their brand of Brexit. And here's the biggest problem of all. Hard Brexit, if that's what we get, will hit the poorest areas hardest, and the areas that I've just been describing hardest, those former industrial communities, and that's why we can't let it happen. This takes me to the second problem of how to influence the government's approach. The risk is, of course, that the Brexit negotiations will be dominated by the same London-leaning perspective that I described to shape national policy over the decades. And again, that might fail to provide real answers to those communities in these post-Brexit times. I'll give you a kind of direct example. Great effort, possibly, might be expended to protect the interests of the financial sector in the City of London. Now, we can all argue that there might be a very good policy reason for doing that. However, it is also the case that Europe might say, well, you can't protect that sector and everything else, and that other sectors, therefore, may lose in the trade negotiations. The point being that there are trade-offs to be had here, aren't there? Trade-offs between certain sectors, trade-offs between the kind of supposed aim about immigration and access to the single market and free trade. These are major questions, massive questions, that no politician at the moment can say they have got the answers to. And these things need to be openly debated with all of the voices of the nations and the regions able to be represented in that debate, because clearly Brexit will have a differential impact on different parts of the country. So one of the things I'm saying today is we don't just need Parliament to be involved in shaping the Brexit negotiations. I believe we need a Brexit committee of the nations and the regions with places for the devolved governments and indeed elected mayors when they come through. I would say that, wouldn't I? But I'm certain it's the right thing to say, because we have to have a situation where the country as a whole is able to shape the post-Brexit context, and it can't look as though it's dominated by an out-of-touch Westminster perspective. If the government doesn't change course, so if it carries on down the path that it's taken with its approach to Brexit, I think it could cause great damage and resentment. It could further the problems that we're all talking about today, and it could even lead to the breakup of the UK by handing the SNP all the ammunition that they need. I think we urgently need to change course. And the last way in which the government have got its response wrong is on this whole thing about the policy choices they've made since the referendum. They spent much of the summer throwing cold water on the idea of devolution in England, saying that they wanted it basically to stop there. You know, it's an Osborne creation. They don't want it to go any further, and they won't be imposing mayors on anywhere. Again, I think that is entirely the wrong response. The right response is to deepen devolution in England, give a greater voice to these areas and embrace it as the answer. So how might we do that to build on what I've been saying? If I'm elected next year as the first mayor of Greater Manchester, I just want to explain to you the approach that I will take. I don't want to see devolution in England as a chance to say, we'll run things slightly better than the Tories. I don't think that's going to mean much to people who we might be looking to vote. I think you've got to say to people, the country hasn't been run fairly for us for all these years, so we're going to use devolution to make a real change. And what I plan to do to illustrate that is to put young people at the heart of my mayoral campaign. Not in a tokenistic way, in any way, shape or form, but in a very real way. As a response to what we've seen actually in the last 5 or 6 years, where young people have been made the target for cuts by Westminster when it came to deficit reduction. I believe that was entirely the wrong response, and actually quite a self-serving response from politicians who want to protect benefits for older people because they think they're the people who vote. It's been the wrong response because you cannot strip support away from young people and not damage the future prosperity of this country. So what I want to say is, no, we won't do that. We'll do the opposite. We cannot have a situation in England where last year 28% of young people under 16 who were referred to mental health services for support received nothing at all. We just cannot have that. That is a scandal in my view. We cannot have a situation today in Greater Manchester where around 30% of 4-year-olds arrive in reception class when they're not school ready. That will never build, and we were talking about inequality as I walked in, that will never build a more equal society if we don't correct things at that point. The best way to create a more equal society is to invest in those early years of life. But more than that, how are we going to give our young people at school confidence that there is something there for them at the end of school if there's no EMA and there's no support and there's no ability for them to travel to get to the opportunities that they want? So I'm going to prioritise making free or concessionary travel for 16 to 18-year-olds one of the big things that I say, because I want to raise people's sights in Greater Manchester. I want to give young people hope. I want to say to those young people, do you know what? We're not going to do to you what Westminster have done to you. We're going to invest in you. We are going to give you access to opportunity. We're going to make sure that you can go to the college of your choice. You can get an apprenticeship where you want one. We're going to have a UCAS-style system for apprenticeships in Greater Manchester to give that message to those young people that we believe in them, we want them to have something. Now, that, I think, is what this debate has got to be all about. Take control of it, but be ambitious with it. Okay, we can't promise things that we don't have the money for, but absolutely shape it, put our stamp on it. Let's not have the Labour Party kind of sneering on the sidelines, saying, oh, it's an Osborne thing. The time is come, I would say now, to invest all of our political energy into this. And actually, like Scotland, remember what happened when we were complacent in Scotland. Well, don't repeat the same mistake. where we kind of hovered back from devolution and we let the SNP shape it. That's why I'm ready to leave Westminster. If you look back at our history in Scotland, people didn't leave Westminster, and they kind of gave an impression that we weren't that bothered about the Parliament that we'd created. Well, we mustn't make the same mistake again. And actually, we need to start talking of devolution in England as a journey, not as we just get the deal that we get in May next year and that's it. We talk about it as something we want to develop for the long term. So what I will say is, let's deal with the missing pieces in the devolution jigsaw. Take education. I passionately believe that a 21st century comprehensive education system should try and give true parity to academic and technical education along what you might call the German model. But how can I do that when we have the Gove inheritance in secondary schools of a very atomised and fragmented primary and secondary school system where actually the mayor won't have any control? I will be saying, surely there is a case, if devolution is to mean something, if you want us to reshape the whole pathway for young people, that you have to bring primary and secondary education within the remit. And you must give the mayor the ability to say academic selection is not the answer for places like Greater Manchester, because I can say to you all now, it is most definitely and emphatically not the answer. Rethinking comprehensive education for the 21st century is the only answer, in my view, that will work. Or take another area, the reform of public services. The great opportunity that the mayoral position brings in any area is that it brings under one roof the different policy areas. And it gives us a moment where, for the first time, we can get rid of the silos in the public sector, because there's one person with a responsibility, and you can start to encourage joint working. And it's beginning to happen in Greater Manchester. I went to a place in the Wigan Borough recently where the police are sitting alongside the council. You know the kind of the things that the work that's being done, but it's been done in a deeper level now in Greater Manchester. But the thing they say is, the professionals in that room, the thing they all said to me is, please get the DWP involved in this. And that's what I would want to do. Well, I would want to argue for the devolution of the DWP budget. I am absolutely certain that not just if I was mayor, if anybody was mayor, if we had control of the DWP budget in Greater Manchester, if we were able to link it much more closely to our other public services, if we were able to link it to our voluntary sector and our community organisations, to our businesses, I am certain we could get better returns for that money for the people of Greater Manchester than we currently get from the top-down sanctions-based regime operated by the DWP. And that's why I say devolution has got to be a journey where we do take control and we really put our stamp on it. So I'll finish on that point. I am, for the reasons I've given you, ready to leave Westminster. I don't see Westminster as being capable at the moment of coming up to the answers, the depth of the despair that we heard through the referendum campaign. I don't think the current structures will answer those concerns. I think you have to embrace devolution as a major part of what the answer might be. I don't see any evidence that Westminster is reinventing itself after the referendum. I think it's reverted to its bad old ways. I feel that if we don't respond to the very real concern that's out there now, and if we carry on in the way that we are, we will have a major democratic crisis in this country. We will create the conditions for extremists to make real gains on the ground in communities, particularly across the north of England. I am not prepared to let that happen. I'm ready to leave Westminster. I'm ready to throw all of my political energy into making this success. My plea is that you do too, and you join us and you get involved, and we make this the way in which the left reinvents itself. Thank you very much for listening.